available?
I think I've seen Dr. Ramamoorti.
Yes,
and
they
Eric
have both
Cohen is
joined
here
us,
as well.
Brian. Yes.
Perfect. So if those two gentlemen are ready to go, or will be ready to go in a moment. Thanks, Diana. Okay. Perfect. Yep, here we go. Okay, so what I'd like to do now then is introduce the speakers for our next information and education session. So continuing on with our blockchain theme this meeting, but now with consideration of internal control insights and perspectives. Sri Ramamoorti is a University of Dayton accounting professor, but he considers himself a reflective practitioner. I'll let him explain what that is. Previously, he was on the US PCAOB Standing Advisory Group, and he'll be joining the FEI National Board in July. Sri is also a co-author of the COSO Blockchain and Internal Control Research paper, and today he's excited to present with his collaborator, Eric Cohen, who is a co-founder of XBRL, and whose technical interests include areas like audit data standards and data level assurance, continuous audit, and distributed ledgers. I've had the pleasure of meeting Eric a couple of years ago now, as we both presented at a University of Waterloo Ethics and Technology Symposium. So great to see you again, Eric, and welcome to you both. So with that, let me slide the virtual floor your way to carry on.
So thank you,
All
Brian.
right.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks, Eric, for putting up the slides here. As Brian wanted me to explain, well, what I meant by the reflective practitioner comment is that I have been with Anderson Worldwide, with Ernst & Young, and Grant Thornton, as well as a software consulting firm called Infogix. So I have been in practice for quite a number of years, and that's what makes me a reflective practitioner. Let me fix the... Okay. So the way this project started was in 2018, I was in San Francisco with Eric being a technical presenter at the AAA Blockchain Symposium, which was co-sponsored by the Accounting Blockchain Coalition, and very well received. And that's where it struck me that, you know, having the kind of talent that Eric represents in terms of his deep knowledge, technical knowledge in this area, why not think about exploring what blockchain-enabled environments can do with respect to internal controls. So
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Ramamoorti. I'm wondering if you can just speak a bit closer to your mic or turn up your volume a little bit. Is that okay?
Okay, let me see. Is that better? No?
Yes.
Is that a little better?
Not maybe just a tad more. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
We can no longer hear Sri. Well, while we're waiting for Sri, why don't I pick up in his place, and then we'll have him join us already in progress. In our 20 minutes, this is what we're going to be doing. Sri, if he's back with us, we'll start off with some introductory comments. We will then dig into the 2020 COSO Blockchain Internal Controls research paper. We'll give a little bit of a background of it and some of the key insights. In the briefing paper that you have, we distributed, we gave you some detail about the implications for ethics and organizational culture that were called out in the paper. But again, Sri will also summarize those as he comes back and joins us. We'll then move to some issues that during the process of putting together that paper, we came into. The COSO research paper was focused on internal controls over financial reporting. And we also had a number of thoughts more broadly that we wanted to share. We'll have some concluding remarks, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Sri, are you back with us?
He isn't.
Okay. So let me just keep on going then. Sri wanted to really focus on this. We will be talking about it in a lot more detail, but we included in the briefing document and the executive summary of the research paper, and a lot more detail in the appendix of that paper. This slide will hit at the end, but wanted to emphasize that, as I guess you heard yesterday, blockchain isn't just tomorrow's challenge. It's already bringing change. And with that change happening, as we've noted, blockchain is already something that the profession has found itself reacting to rather than acting upon. I know in your presentation yesterday, you heard about some uses from practitioners and others. Just making sure that you did see this one, where there's already a really trailblazing CPA firm out of California, and they're delivering real-time attestation level reports. They started with attestation based on the former AT 101. It's now agreed upon procedure reports, which are created and signed by computers with no human intervention. They access certain information on blockchains, they compare it with information automatically from third-party sources, and then they report on whether there's sufficient support for the amounts that are reported in the public, transparent, real-time blockchain data. The CPA solution also serves to provide comfort for systems that are automatically going to rely on the balance checks using decentralized applications and the smart contracts that Brian mentioned. So on your scene, you see that the CPA, in conjunction with the client, is providing this data. We've got this much out there, 6,368. We have checked the system, 360, 6368 is the support. 6346 is what we have out there, so there's sufficient support for what we're working with. Someone can go and say, I would like right now an independent accountant's report that is this proof and is associated with this. And up will come in this report an agreed upon procedure engagement, time-stamped PDF form that has the results, the criteria, and a real-time signed agreed upon procedure report, all on demand, no people involved.
Thank you.
And Eric, I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay, Sri, great.
Again, thank you for carrying the ball and waiting for me until I got my voice back. Okay, so let me carry on with this slide. So one of the most important things with you as human beings is environmental scanning. And what I mean by that is tracking change. Tracking change is one of the most important things that we do, because even in the brain, that is what is called the stability plasticity dilemma, which helps us maintain continuity with change. And so this making sense of the world cannot be better captured than by Martek's law. And what Martek's law says is that technology advances exponentially while organizations change only logarithmically, which leaves standard setters in a forever state of playing catch up. Here is a visual representation of Martek's law. You can see how the curve showing how technology changes exponentially is literally on a very steep upward sloping curve, whereas the fact that organizations change only logarithmically leaves a big gap, and this challenge grows harder with time. I can tell you some research recently has shown that in the context of COVID, it seems there was a bump in terms of how organizations did try to catch up a little faster than previously. But bottom line, this is something we'll experience with both blockchain as well as with emerging technologies. Along the way, we also have to consider automation as well as other biases. Automation bias is called out in the Exploring the Code installment number 1, Focus on Bias. Basically, it says that we have a tendency to over-rely on automation, and that may not be to our benefit, because increased efficiency does not imply increased effectiveness. And the final point I want to make is that, as Bill Donaldson, the former SEC chairman, said, internal controls are the very DNA of the organization. So whenever internal controls are compromised, you have all kinds of issues, error, fraud, maybe even bankruptcy and the death of the corporation. So the control environment is critically important. And that's why our team was focused on looking at what kind of effect is a blockchain-enabled control environment have on the control environment in general, and vice versa, because this is a reciprocal causation going on here. Blockchain would affect the control environment, and the control environment components will, in effect, have an influence on blockchain and how it's integrated. So the other components of internal control, which I'll be talking about later, are risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. And as I said, these are all parts of the COSO internal control integrated framework, which I'll talk about later. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the paper, which was, I believe, shared with the group. And this is the paper on which Eric and I are co-authors, along with two Deloitte partners. And as I was saying, when I guess I suddenly cut out, my apologies for that. It was in 2018 that I started thinking about this, and we reached out to COSO, and COSO was interested in having a thought piece like this. And then, with the help of Deloitte, we also got into the details of, how would this paper look like. We had to cover blockchain. We obviously had to cover internal control, the integrated framework from COSO, originally issued in 1992, updated in 2013. And then how do we marry the two and show what are the points of intersection and what does that mean? How would that intersection, on the one hand, enhance the control environment, to perhaps create new risks and threats because of the introduction of blockchain, and finally, what do we do about mitigation? And so that's what we did. We have a few appendices. The first appendix is a technical appendix or a glossary. The second one is, about the 10 things that, Eric just showed all of us. And the final one was about financial reporting, assertions, and audit evidence. And, again, the influence of blockchain and all this. Next slide. So this is the famous COSO Cube. And I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with this. COSO is, of course, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Consists of the American Accounting Association, the AICPA, the IIA, FEI, and IMA. Those are the 5 organizations, behind it. And they came out with Internal Control Integrated Framework in 1992, and as I said, updated in 2013. So this COSO Cube, which has been with us for a couple of decades now, is showing in a cross-sectional way across operations, reporting, and compliance. We look at the 5 internal control components of control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. And since this is an ethics-related group, perhaps I should point out that a useful mnemonic to remember these 5 components is actually the word crime. And that'll give you, the 5 internal control components I just said, just easy memory. Now, we also look at specific applications at an entity level, or, whether it's a division or an operating unit or even a function. So, this is a robust framework that cuts across, all kinds of considerations. And the control environment, which is going to be, Eric and my focus today because of the ethics kind of angle, that has 5 principles out of the 17 principles in total that are in the framework. It is a principle-based framework. So the 5 top ones, which come under control environment, are demonstrates commitment to integrity and ethical values, exercises oversight, responsibility, establishes structure, authority, and responsibility, demonstrates commitment to competence, and enforces accountability. Clearly, very, very close to ideas around ethics. There are other control components. I won't go into that right now, but I can tell you the information communication obviously, matters. Monitoring clearly matters, and how can we forget risk assessment? So really, all 5 of these are interlinked, and they're all relevant. But we'll focus on control environment because for this presentation, the ethics component is squarely in that sort of box, so to speak. So expanding on the control environment, which, as I just read out, the top 5 principles are noted there. Because ethics and organizational culture are part of this component, we want to take a very careful look on what kind of enhancements are possible. Now, one of the things is, because the control environment clearly is dealing with tone from the top and things like that, we are talking about human involvement. And, when you're talking about leadership, when you're talking about, inspiration, motivation, trust, communication, all that, which is part of the control environment, but is a very human thing, one might at first blush wonder, what can blockchain do? Probably not much. Well, you would actually be mistaken, because it can definitely supplement a lot of these things and sometimes improve matters quite substantially. So let's take the first example under enhancements. Many times human beings can be the problem in terms of, transactional integrity, especially when you're thinking of hanky-panky of any kind. Whereas when you remove management from manual intervention, you are really denying them the possibility to engage in management override of internal controls. So there you go. So blockchain actually would allow an environment in which that kind of undesirable involvement is taken care of. So that's one example of an enhancement. In terms of new threats, well, permissionless blockchains, sort of the public, blockchain may be used for unethical exploits. And sometimes, you have a certain level of pseudonymity with blockchain that may embolden, people to engage in behavior that you may not otherwise engage in. So yeah, clearly, I think the introduction of blockchain does introduce new sorts of risks that we need to pay attention to. And in terms of the mitigation, well, one good example is when you have, a consortium blockchain, whereas, individuals or groups that are banded together. And if you don't have good accountability mechanisms and you don't have proper protocols for handling disputes, you could be in trouble. And so that is a governance and an accountability thing that needs to be considered and thought through carefully in those kinds of arrangements. I think Eric will talk more about how in an international context, that can really become a serious matter. So just want to say there's a reciprocal relationship, as I noted before, between blockchain and internal control and vice versa. So this is something in the briefing paper that we provided as a pre-reading, and we included explicit and specific references to the control environment component of internal control. And you'll find words and phrases like ethical values, human behavior, management decisions, integrity and ethics, perceived and actual ethical practices, and always, keeping ethical issues top of mind. And I've just noted the possibility of unethical exploits, which gets exacerbated in the context of a permissionless blockchain. So clearly, ethics is front and center in the control environment component.
So I will try and go a little quickly because I know we're running behind time. As I mentioned, we began to analyze this in a number of ways. What is just about blockchain and blockchain technology? What about blockchain plus AI, blockchain plus IoT? And we also considered where we and others think that it'll have a real impact on implementations, as well as the broad changes it can enable. As Sri just mentioned, blockchain, which has been adopted in those consortium blockchains, that's blurring the lines between enterprises. And that can strongly impact the risks, the controls, the ethics, and the corporate cultures in the disparate enterprises that it's now binding together. As mentioned in the research paper, issues such as management control come into a real new light when management override can have that more global context.
So I just want to be very quick about this. Just want to say that there is another framework that COSO has. It's the ERM Framework, Enterprise Risk Management. And in many ways, it's broader, more substantive, because it subsumes the 2013 framework. It also considers strategy. And so it's really integrating strategy and performance for the enterprise. So given that, I think a good project would be to look at, blockchain in the context of risk. And that risk is very well articulated in the ERM framework.
So thinking beyond the framework, the 2013 framework, we determined there are many additional issues that the profession needs to consider, from the basics of the technical issues inherent to blockchain, to its applications, to the potential changes in institutions and in society. One of the primary challenges is that an awful lot of the information you see on the web, in articles, even from the best sources, it is either oversimplified or it is simply wrong. Issues about privacy, accuracy beyond simple balances, security, and who owns or controls or has access to what in the environment. The capabilities such as suitability for accounting, with things such as the so-called triple entry accounting, are often oversimplified. And people speak about how blockchain is the perfect audit trail, inherently self-auditing, but a simple illustration of information that can be found in Bitcoin and related blockchains is found in the upper right of this slide from a website called Cryptograffiti that shows the inherent and validatable audit trail is not as pure and reliable as most people note. But on the next slide, we're going to dig into a bit into the information found in the technical appendix that we provided in our pre-briefing information. So Brian had mentioned the term smart contracts, and tokenization are two things in particular that have been called out as groundbreaking technologies that can impact and revolutionize accounting and audit. I personally have been assessing how each of these items can be examined using the Ashbys framework as a lens. For example, if you think about decentralization and the related impact of the blurring of enterprise and national borders, it may prove to be a big challenge to the principle of professional behavior, which requires a professional accountant to comply with relevant laws and regulations. Also facilitated by blockchain, there are organizations that offer solutions that will change the very nature of the relationship between an enterprise, the auditor, the investor whose value is at stake, and the public, including how auditors are engaged and paid.
So I wanted to then bring us back to the idea of going beyond blockchain and looking at the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence can do a better job than refer to this book by Hannah Fry, How to Be Human in an Age of Machines. That's what we are really talking about here. And I'm going to indicate with help of this picture, we have circles here. So if we come from the outer circle where we are only dealing with manual only, so human activities, I think the Ashbys framework does a very fine job of relating to how human beings might be held accountable with respect to key metrics, of behavior that are relevant to the profession. But now we are in a world where people use technology and professionals use technology into a very high art form, actually, and it's only growing even more sophisticated and complex. So we are talking here about human beings supplemented, or accountants and auditors being supplemented with technology. So one of the first things we have to think about is what happens when something goes wrong. when something goes wrong, we have to think about how is maybe the culpability to be determined. Could it be that it was the involvement of the machine that caused the error? After all, we have a Farmer's Almanac statement: to err is human, but to really foul up things, you need a computer. So there you go. We can think of the computer as being responsible for this. Now, the blockchain plus that Eric referred to earlier, which is an expansive consideration of, artificial intelligence, IoT, RPA, virtual reality, all kinds of things that are coming at us, that would bring us to a world where it'll be people led by technology. It's not just being supplemented. It is the people who are being, brought along. It is the technology in the lead here. So if something goes wrong in those instances, we have an even more serious problem, which could be an ethical issue. And finally, of course, when human beings get completely supplanted and we have autonomous technologies or systems, a simple example, in case you're wondering, is in almost every large city nowadays, traffic systems are autonomous systems. There is no human operator changing the lights from red to amber to green. No, it's all happening automatically. So under those kind of circumstances, when you have completely autonomous, behavior through machines, how do we even discuss ethical issues, particularly when things go wrong? And how does society grapple with what is the level of acceptable risk in these kind of situations? So those are the questions I'd like for us to, consider. These are just some observations that I like to make. You cannot effectively manage, account for, or audit what you don't understand, and which is what Blockchain Plus accelerates. There's something called Ashbys Law, talking about how the systems that are being regulated need to have a regulator that compounds within itself at least the complexity that's found in the environment that is sought to be regulated. So basically, the client environment matters, the accountant's competence matters, and you cannot audit any better than the client's environment will allow. That's really the takeaway there. Now, blockchain and other emerging technologies, in my mind, and I think Eric would agree with this, pose a competency threat for the profession. So we really do need to upskill. We need to get large numbers of professional accountants to not only embrace the technology, but become competent in its use and its applications. And clearly, Brian mentioned this in his comments about PAIBs and PIPPs. They are all sources of potential risk, whether they are within the organization, within the client's environment, or in their individual capacity. So those are some additional observations to consider.
So I know we've stretched our time. We've referenced this 10 things to know about blockchain in the briefing and research. We do think that they're very helpful. Calling out just a few quickly that might resonate. Number 5, blockchain is, in most people's mind, a technology, but much more it is about governance. It's about policy. It is about ethics, and other issues are really important. Number 6, people say that blockchain will make accountants and auditors obsolete. I talked to someone today, quite convinced about that, and I have written extensively on this topic. I am personally working to help to get accountants ready for blockchain and blockchain ready for accountants. Number 7, blockchain is a catalyst to many potential changes that are going to require entirely new disciplines, new relationships between organizations. Enterprise culture can take on an entirely new meaning in a trans-enterprise world. And finally, number 8, we encourage all who are involved in the profession and around to dialogue, educate, elevate, and engage the stakeholder community. This has to be the time. We've got to work together. Technical people, policy people, change management people, and everyone. Again, thank you for your patience. We hope our time will help in supplementing the important work that's reflected in the Phase 1 report and the existing draft materials that this group has already put out. Technical change is having a real impact on ethical and corporate culture. Blockchain and blockchain in conjunction with other technologies will and has already started to be the foundation for new ways of doing business, integrating systems, and making, both in the figurative and literal sense, money. And we need to consider the potential scenarios that are based on the broad possibilities to anticipate how life and the application of ethics may change as the world of business and accounting becomes enmeshed with this new facilitator of doing things. Sri, what is a design thinking mindset?
So the design thinking mindset is basically best illustrated, and I know we are out of time here. I just want to say two comments. One, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So you want to be future oriented in your thinking. And a famous comment by Ilya Prigogine, sometimes, that's attributed to Denis Gabor, that the future cannot be predicted, perhaps, but futures can be invented. So, design thinking is about how do we design a future that firmly remains in our control, rather than keeping it as a runaway thing, and we suddenly lose control and we don't know what to do. We're helpless.
So with whatever time, Brian, we hand it back to you. We're glad to answer any questions now or in the future.
Any questions from the board, please raise hand. I have a raised hand from Vanya.
Vanya?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Professors Sri and Eric, for the brilliant presentation. I was just wondering, I love the graphic that you showed about the velocity of technology advancement against market. And I was wondering if it was not a result of somewhat a result of difficult generation, because technology is so complex and sophisticated that the old people who learn how to do business in such a way do not have the time or the expectation of or learning the new technology, as it will not be the same tomorrow again. So maybe it's just a gap of generation, and we need the new generation to took our place in order to provoke the changes, somewhat through education, somewhat through regulation. How to give incentive for those who are already in the market to realize that they should follow technology advancement. How to do that?
Well, that's a very, very astute observation, Vanya, because there's this phrase which is very effective in confirming what you just said, which is growing up digital. And I study boards of directors, and I've noted the average age of a US corporate board member is 61. And what does that tell you? They probably did not grow up digital. And they are obviously going to have a very hard time adapting, to any new technologies. And so, to your point, though, I think we need to tell the younger generation that the future is indeed looking very different, where technology is going to be not only pervasive, but pretty much the enabler and the driver of anything that they want to accomplish that's meaningful. And that they need to be in the driver's seat if they are going to take handle of that kind of technological change and control over the environment. And the prior generation simply does not know enough to do that. And they find it very hard even to imagine that. So your point is well taken.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any other comment or questions. Sri, Narek?
I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, let me add my thanks then to Sri and Eric for a great presentation. I'm over 61, but I'm starting to understand with your leadership. Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Brian.
think, Caroline, did you have a comment? I just saw you raised hand momentarily. No?
Oh, Caroline.
No, I just wanted to express my thanks. So it was a clap, Chair.
Oh, I beg your pardon. It was too similar to me. Okay, sorry. Back to you, Brian.
Brian, we can't hear you. Brian, you're on mute.